Hello again, friends. This is The Swift Half with Snowdon. I am your host, Christopher Snowdon. Well done for tuning in. Get away from the howling madness outdoors and listen to a bit of calm and reasonable common sense with me and my special guest. He is Andrew Lilico. You probably know him best for his work as an armchair epidemiologist on Twitter, but he's also an economist. Andrew, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, thank you. I'm looking forward to Christmas. We've got some Christmas parties to go to as instructed by Boris Johnson. I've been working at home for a few days, so I'll have an excuse to go into the office now.
Yeah, I too am working from home, as you can see, back in the old lockdown studio of my office. And so it's kind of nice to be here, but I'm with you. I'm looking forward to a totally normal Christmas and nothing is going to get in my way. Or is it? What's going on with the Omicron variant? So you were very bullish about Delta. You felt it basically run its course. But now you seem, if anything, a bit more pessimistic than me, actually, about the new variant. So we should say we're recording this on Tuesday morning. So we may well be overtaken by events by the time this comes out on Thursday. Or our predictions our short-term predictions may have been proven correct. So where do you think we are? What's going to happen?
Well, it looks to me like we're going to have a very large Omicron wave. It could well go to, I don't think that the predictions of a million infections a day are necessarily all that extravagant. It may not happen, but I don't think we can say for sure at this stage that it won't. The data from South Africa, the wave might be petering out, but it might not. That might just be a pause before it hits some other segment to infect just as fast as it managed to race through the first few. There was some hope that it would turn out to be materially milder. The latest data seems to indicate that it might be a tad milder, but not so much as to change the game. And so I think we're going to end up with a problem. I don't think it's a problem on this occasion, which we need to have any kind of lockdown or anything like that to counter. I think it should largely be a matter of advice, but I don't think that we should pretend that it's nothing. I mean, even just anecdotally, just around me. So I live just north of London. The number of people that I've come across in the past few days who've just tested positive with probably the Omicron variant is just off the scale of anything I'd seen with Delta or Alpha or the wild type. This thing it seems to be absolutely racing through. And I don't think the data has really caught up with the real world experience at this stage.
So, yeah, I'm with you. I know a lot of people in London in particular who've got it, all mild, I should say, at the moment. But I mean, that is the message coming through from South Africa. I mean, quite a lot. I tend to have a bit more faith in the South African Medical Association than a lot of people do. But I can't remember the lady's name from there, but she's been on British stations. Katse, yeah. She's been on a lot, and she seems to be doing so many interviews because she's getting a bit frustrated with nobody really listening to her. And she's saying, look, I'm on the ground here. I'm a doctor, and I can tell you now that this is really very mild. We've got no one on oxygen. It doesn't matter whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. It's a milder virus. And really, we don't understand why the rest of the world's panicking. South Africa's been very bullish with its restrictions. They had bans on, you can buy alcohol and tobacco for quite a long time, but they're on their lowest level of restrictions, which is like a curfew at midnight and mask wearing. They've shown no interest in raising that level. Why are you so kind of skeptical about what the doctors are saying in South Africa?
Well, I'm not. It's not that I'm skeptical about that. It's that that quite a significant reduction in severity is priced in to the way that we think and model these things in the UK, because we have such high levels of vaccination and of infection-acquired immunity. So the latest, there was a study that came out overnight, just so as I say, we're speaking on a Tuesday, so over Monday evening, a study came out from South Africa, which showed that which suggested at least that there was about a 29% reduction in hospitalization rates relative to the wild type, the original form that went through South Africa back 18 months or whatever it was ago. And that is quite a large reduction relative to Delta, because the Alpha variant had something like 1.5 times, was something like 1.5 times as bad as the original form, and then Delta was something like 2 or 1.9 times as bad as Alpha. So you're getting up to 3 times as bad once you multiply those two together. So being 29% less bad than the thing which was already only 1/3 as bad would seem like it's quite a lot of reduction. So if you were sitting on the ground in South Africa, then it's very natural, I think, to say, well, look, this thing's a lot less severe than the other waves that we've had. So what's the issue? But the thing is, with the vaccinations, you'd have expected something like a 70 to 80% reduction. That's priced in. So if you only get, 85, 90% reduction, then that's not any more than was already expected via the process of vaccination. And in order for that to be game changing, if once you have 1 million infections a day, unless you've got a lot of reduction in the severity, we're going to get 5,000, 7,000 hospitalizations a day with the level of vaccination cover that we have. So it's still these are things which should be survivable, and a few little intelligent things. I think that we should be getting probably advising, not making them, but advising the elderly and vulnerable to shield for a few weeks, and then we can all go off and see them for Epiphany and give them their Christmas presents and sing Epiphany carols and dress as wise men or whatever it is that we want to do. Because really, Omicron thing is coming through that fast that on this occasion, I know everyone will be cynical about the 3 weeks to squash the curve, and 89 weeks later you're still saying that, but it really does seem in the data like on this occasion the Omicron variant is going through so fast. If it's going to give us a problem at all, it's going through so fast that we really are talking about that smaller time window. Conversely, if everything's going to be okay, we'll know in about a week, because the South African wave will have petered out, and so instead of that thing which is sort of flattening a bit starting to go up again, it'll start going down, and then we can say, okay, this is just the thing which infects only the young who only had a previous infection and no other kind of protection, and so we're probably all going to be okay, and the elderly can come out and we'll all go and see them for Christmas. But and we don't need to mandate. It's not a matter, I mean, most older people will probably be okay. It's just that we don't want all the people who end up hospitalized to turn up hospitalized in the same week. Because that's really the thing. It doesn't have to be a problem here. We're not talking about mass levels of death. We're not talking, if we don't have a problem with the NHS being swamped, we're not talking about numbers of people dying in an Omicron wave, which is wholly disproportionate to a nasty flu season. We're talking about something of that order of magnitude, maybe a bit worse than a nasty flu season, but not out of the park worse. So it doesn't have to be that big a deal. If we could just smooth things, squash the sombrero a little, then I think things should be okay. A little bit of common sense. When
you talk about modeling, have you done your own modeling on this? Are you talking about other people?
No, well, I've done some modeling, yes, and others have done modeling as well. There's always lots of appetite for modeling these things when anything new turns up, obviously. I think it's plausible we could get to 1.3 million infections a day in the models that I've done, and some people think some of the things that I've done are a little bit optimistic in some dimensions.
Really?
But so I don't think it's out of the park. Now, I do think that these things with 1 million infections a day, I think that is possible. The thing which I think that commentators haven't quite absorbed about the Omicron variant is that it's not just that it escapes immunity, which it does quite a lot. It also has a much shorter generation time. So even if it were exactly the same and you were going to have the same peak, you get to that peak twice as quick, right, with the Omicron variant, because each generation goes through only half as fast. Or
you mean the incubation period is shorter, do you mean?
Yeah, so the time from when one person gets an infection to the average number of person that they pass it on is only half as long.
Right.
And what that means is that the lag between things appearing in the data and the stuff which happens in the real world it hides much more things having gone on. So, for example, Sajid Javid was saying was it yesterday that there were going to be 200,000, that there were already 200,000 Omicron cases a day, and everyone was going, well, can't possibly be right. And in fact, it seemed so strange that that his own officials then gave a retraction of the claim, saying that actually he meant 200,000 in total. And then later they retracted the retraction, which doesn't bode that well for the competence of the people dealing with these difficult situations. But anyway, and the thing with that seemed so absurd because of the quite small number of cases that we've actually detected so far. But that's because in the background, so that means we won't see those 200,000 cases
for a week
turning into infections. They're infections. We won't see them turn into cases for 4 or 5 days, and they won't be reported till next week. So that would really be something like 125,000, probably including the Delta bit, cases reported next Monday. And this thing is really going so fast that doubling in a week, that's perfectly plausible. So I think it's,
well, the models are based on it doubling every couple of days.
Exactly. So a doubling in a week of the cases from today. Remember, this is Omicron doubling. That was Omicron doubling every couple of days. So the total cases doubling from what they were yesterday to next Monday that's not out of the park, and it'll probably accelerate from there because, as you say, Omicron's going to grow much faster than Delta, which is probably going to fall away. So and as I say, this fact that you get more stuff going on in the background also creates a challenge for policymakers, because it means that the lag between having anything reliable that you can look at in terms of numbers and the events which you need to respond to is much more difficult to manage. There's going to be a lot more happen before you really see it. And so I think that's a problem. And conversely, a lot more can happen in the other direction, right? So it could be that you start doing something, and then by the time you can see anything in the data, it turned out that it all petered out and gone away, and you feel ridiculous. So it's, I mean, it's
my optimistic feeling about this, and this can go down as a hostage to fortune on video, is that by the time we get to Christmas, assuming the government hasn't done anything stupid like bring in a lockdown or whatever, the whole thing will have pretty much fallen apart. We'll see from South Africa that it's all right, and Zimbabwe, which Botswana, which no one's talking about because nothing's happening at all in Botswana, and the UK, and it's slowed down enormously. There'll be no talk of doubling every 2 or 3 days, and people can get on and enjoy their Christmas. That's the optimistic take, but it's not based on pure gormless optimism, although I do use that quite a lot in my own modeling. It was largely based on the vaccines and the boosters. And it seems to me like everyone's just become vaccine skeptic now. You know, we've got about 45% of adults have had the booster. And when people talk about the vaccines not working against Omicron, they really just mean against infection. Everyone's still saying, or every scientist is still saying, no, they still really work well against severe disease, which is what we're supposed to be concerned with. But the boosters actually stop infection really quite effectively, 95%, I think. So we've got the most vulnerable people plus a lot more have already got that. The rate of growth does seem to be slowing, certainly in South Africa, but also I think slowing in the last few days in the UK as well. So I think the 1 million cases a day thing is absolutely extravagant. I can see how in theory people might think that, but apart from anything else, that kind of rate, it's something like 15,000 per million people, maybe even a bit more than that. That's a kind of rate we have never come anywhere near close to, even in Brazil or India, even, you know, if you allow for undercounting in these places, but we're completely uncontrolled epidemics, really. They've never got anything up to that kind of level. I mean, they haven't got to sort of 25% of it. So it just seems to me extraordinary to think that it's going to happen in the UK when we're so heavily vaccinated.
Well, just a couple of things there. So I think the transmission protection from the vaccines is about 75%, rather than 95. It's 95 against Delta, but they think it's about 75% transmission against Omicron. And the boosters
from symptomatic disease.
Yeah, that's right. Vaccine efficacy.
I thought it was a bit higher than that. But okay.
It might be a fraction lower against the transmission, but it might not. But a thing to bear in mind is if you get infected, most of the protection against being hospitalized came from the protection against being infected. If you got infected, you then, even with the Delta variant, the transmission, the protection was only about 60%.
Right.
So what happens is that if you erode a lot of the transmission protection, then you erode quite a bit of the hospitalization as well. So, for example, the data that came out from South Africa last night says that 2 doses of Pfizer gives you about 70% protection against hospitalization in South Africa.
Which isn't that great, right?
No, well, if you think about it, if you go from 95% protection to 70% protection, that means you have six times as high a chance of ending up going to hospital. And agreed, we're not talking about, most people are going to be fine. And even for the elderly and vulnerable, you've got a good chunk of protection. It's just that from a policy point of view, when you add all of these numbers together, they can turn into quite a significant problem. I do think, so the one kind of mildness thing which looks most promising to me is the data which suggests that the people who go to hospital end up leaving much quicker. Yeah. That's what they're finding in South Africa. So it might be that you don't get that much reduction in the hospitalization, but actually hospitalizations aren't as bad. And that doesn't create the same kind of problem for the NHS because people go, but then they come out quite quick. I guess on your general scenario, I do have a bit of, I had quite a sense of foreboding if you went back to March 2020 or to, September, October 2020. I don't feel it the same way. My instinct on this occasion is to feel, I guess a bit like, you remember that scene in Shakespeare in Love where they go and they grab the guy and they say to him, oh, the whole play isn't going to happen and it's all going to be disaster. And he just says, well, all will be well, right? And he says he doesn't know how. That's that's the way that the theatre is. And I do feel it's a bit like that at the moment. I do think somehow all will be well. That is kind of my feeling on this occasion when it wasn't before. And so I probably share that instinct with you. I don't feel like I am quite able to pin down anything which says that that's why at the moment. But my feeling is that the best thing to do until you can really pin down why all will be well would be to advise the elderly and vulnerable to just spend a few weeks staying away from everybody else until we can. It doesn't have to be mandatory and not everybody will want to do it. But I think that would be wise until probably Epiphany.
But you don't want any laws, because it's interesting, because I don't think there's many people in your position who think that there could well be 1 million cases a day, but don't think the government should really do anything about it.
I don't think we need any laws on this occasion, because I think what we're talking about, I think a lot of the people who are in my position have much less, they're much more sort of pro-doctor than I am. My point of view would be if the NHS ends up with 5,000 hospitalizations a day for a week, and they have to cope with that. They have to cope with that, and we have some busy doctors. If you're a lawyer and you end up having a merger and you have to work all night during the merger, then you work all night during the merger, right? So, and that seems to me to be the same kind of a thing here. Basically, what we're talking about is a week or two when the NHS will be very busy, and of course, it's true that you then end up with people would have their cancer appointments would be delayed, and people who probably waited a long time already because of circumstances to have their hip replaced would be delayed for another couple of weeks. And I've got every sympathy for those people. But the question is what the right balance of things to do is between restricting 67 million people and catering for a couple of weeks of extra disruption for people who are dealing with more non-urgent things in the NHS. And my view is that if the NHS can cope at the peak, it just has to be, and as I say, a few little minor things like encouraging people to shield should help with squashing that sombrero. If it can cope with the peak, then we should have it cope with the peak. And the fact that it ends up being disrupted at the peak isn't enough. In 2020, it wasn't a question of being disrupted. It was that we were going to have 2 million people seeking hospitalization over about an 8 to 12 week period, compared with only 170,000 beds in total in the NHS, let alone the breakdown of emergency and so on. So it was just going to be absolutely swamped. And what we saw, for example, in India, when their health service in Delhi was swamped, the death rate went up about 5 times. So those people that need hospital treatment, if you don't give it to them for COVID specifically, they really get in trouble. And you have a lot of avoidable deaths. And that's the issue to me. It's not, the point about the swamping of the NHS is nothing to do with avoiding the NHS having to defer non-urgent treatment, or that you end up with busy doctors and that kind of a thing. It's the swamping of the NHS is very specific to COVID. It would mean that you had so many COVID cases turning up that you had a lot of COVID people dying completely unnecessarily. And that was what that's what those other lockdowns were about from my point of view. And that, to me, as far as I can look at the numbers, is just not going to happen on this occasion. The NHS might come under a lot of pressure, but that shouldn't happen. And if we can just take the edge off a little with things like a little bit of shielding for the elderly and vulnerable for a few weeks, voluntarily, supported with the government delivering things to them and so on, then that should be enough. That's my view on this occasion.
I mean, we never had a very good definition of what it means for the NHS to be overwhelmed or for it to collapse or to be, because it's not helped by the fact that it's supposedly always on the brink, particularly in winter. And whether it's a case of the boy crying wolf or, the NHS is generally just useless and can't deal with any kind of surging cases, I'm not quite sure. But I mean, my basic definition is that the health service is overwhelmed when it has to start cancelling routine surgery and routine appointments and elective surgery and things have been planned, which, let's face it, it does every winter pretty much. And it's collapsed when you can't even get treated if you have a motorcycle accident and you need to go in intensive care. And there certainly have been a number of instances around the world when there's been genuine collapse. I mean, I think India kind of ran out of oxygen, and as you say, that enormously increases the case fatality rate. The case fatality rate is actually pretty high, despite what some people might say anyway for COVID, but going up 5 times is very serious for the COVID patients, but also the total swamping of it is very serious for anybody else. I have to say, I'm so sick of this whole situation. I'm coming around to the idea of just letting the NHS collapse for a few weeks. But you're not saying it's going to get to that stage. It's going to get overwhelmed, but not collapse.
But by your definitions, yes. Yeah. I think that's plausible. It's not guaranteed. It could well be that everything peters out. I mean, I think there is a decent chance that one of the things with Omicron is that it absolutely races through certain population segments. So the young people all kind of infect each other, and the ones whose only prior immunity is an infection, they didn't have any vaccination, they'd only had one prior infection, and you absolutely race through them, and you do it so fast that those people end up so sick so quickly that they never quite encounter the other groups that they don't encounter every day. So they infect the people that they hang out with all the time, who are like them,
but they don't see Granny,
and they don't go. But they never get as far as seeing Granny because they get sick too quick to go and see her. And I think it's possible that we saw something of this in June. What happened was that we had a series of these strange peaks and very rapid growth and so on, partly associated with the Euros. Yeah. And people feared at that time that what was going to happen is that all of those young people and their dads that got infected going in that period were then going to spread it out wider. And it didn't happen because there is some, at least in vaccinated populations, it seems like there's some segmentation, some swimming pool lanes, as it were, that you have. And okay, sure, you can, something goes in the water, it's probably going to spread over to the other lanes eventually. But if you have it does seem that like a possibility that with Omicron, it will just race through segments so fast that it never quite leaks in the same way into other segments, or when it goes there, it spreads a bit slower, and that kind of smooths everything out. And I think that's possible for the UK. I think there are lots of stories you can tell here where everything ends okay, and it's all a bit of a damp squib.
It's a good job there's no event coming up where generations tend to mix together for a couple of days, isn't it?
Well, that's precisely my point. If we could just move that intergenerational mixing event to Epiphany, it's only a matter of a couple of weeks. We can just move it out a couple of weeks. That could make all the difference here.
A few more weeks to save Epiphany.
Yeah, if you like, 2 weeks to save Epiphany. That would be my suggestion.
So obviously you're against the vaccine passports and the Plan B stuff. Why is the government even considering vaccine passports when they've failed so spectacularly everywhere else?
I think it seems to me like it's just another silly bluff like the one they had with the vaccine passports. They're saying now the vaccine passports are going to come in once every adult has had a chance to be boosted. And they're saying for all the talk that there was that they were going to be vaccinating everybody by the new year, actually they're now saying everybody's going to be booked to be boosted by the new year, and some of them will be happening in January, February. Well, I mean, if Omicron's still infecting more than a tiny number of people in February, then this whole thing has turned out to be a damp squib anyway, right? But what we're talking about with this is something which is going to absolutely race through over the next 2 or 3 weeks. by February, we'll be talking about something else entirely. And
talk about a new variant, probably.
Well, it might be a new variant, yes, but or Delta coming back or something. But the thing with that is, there's going to be no point in any. By the time we get to February, and they're starting to, when they would be saying, "Oh, we might introduce vaccine passports," nobody's going to have any interest in a vaccine passport. It's going to be absolutely pointless. So I think it's going to be the same kind of a thing that there was when they were talking about vaccine passports for back in October. They were going to have them.
Well, they're meant to come in September. I mean, I said it was a bluff at the time. It was pretty obvious that they had no plans to do it, to me.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be the same, because what happened with that was that by the time the vaccine passports came up, it'd been like 70-something% of the relevant age group who go to nightclubs had all been infected, plus whatever percentage of them had been vaccinated, and there wasn't any point. And I think it'll be basically the same. The vaccine passports are not going to happen, because by the time we get to February, March, there'll be absolutely no point in them. They're not a device for managing this kind of situation, even remotely. So I just don't think it'll happen.
It's quite interesting. The London School of Tropical Medicine model at the weekend, they look at the various effects of different measures, and they explicitly say that they don't foresee vaccine passports having any effect on transmission, infection, or anything else, other than that an extra few people of that age group will get vaccinated.
Yeah,
which is, I mean, clearly true, really, isn't it? So it's fairly obviously a nudge, if you like, a bit more than nudge. One quick question about COVID. I do want to move on briefly at the end to other things. And I'll ask this question because it seems to be something that most people are still not talking about, which is natural infection. Now, we've both had COVID, I think about half the population has. We've also both been double jabbed. I don't know if you had your booster yet. I haven't. What kind of protection does that give us? It's very hard to get a lot of data on this kind of stuff. Nobody really wants to talk about it. It seems to me there's been a bit of a conspiracy of science from the beginning, because they didn't want to encourage people who've been infected to go start living normally again. But it's got to count for something, right?
Well, so essentially, look, I'm not a doctor, so you want to take anything I say on this with a pinch of salt. So make sure that you go and seek a medical advice from somebody who does know what they're talking about. But my looking at the numbers thing, which is all that I can do without any medical training, the figures, as I understand it, are that 2 doses, that essentially an infection counts like a dose, basically.
Right.
So if you've had two doses of vaccine plus an infection, you're essentially 3 dosed. Now, if you get a booster as well, that increases your immunity further. It's not that it sort of tops out at 3. Yep. So having the booster adds something again on top. And bear in mind that what we're talking about with 3 is only 75%. So there's plenty of room, right, for things to get better with that extra 1 on top. But your immunity from 1 infection plus 2 vaccines, in the numbers that I've seen, and I'm not a doctor, in the numbers that I'm a doctor, but I'm a PhD.
A real doctor, you are.
I'm a real doctor, not one of those fake medical ones. In the numbers that I've seen, it's slightly better than just 3 doses. So it should be that if you've had an infection plus 2 doses, you should be a bit better protected than somebody. But that's not by any means perfect. I mean, right. My wife has currently got COVID. She had 2 doses of vaccine and a lab confirmed infection, and she's got probably the Omicron variant now. So you shouldn't assume it isn't anything close to perfect, the protection from these things. But it is supposed to provide quite a lot. Those 3, an extra booster will supposedly do more. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, one curious thing here is I think there are scenarios where you're talking about new variants. Even if you don't get a new variant, it's perfectly plausible that what happens in the future is we get a cycle of Delta and Omicron swapping over, because bear in mind, Omicron escapes most of the Delta protection. We shouldn't assume that Delta doesn't escape the Omicron protection. I mean, because they're quite different, right? Mm. So Omicron escapes the infection. If you've had a Delta infection, then Omicron escapes that well. There aren't any tests yet, but there's at least a pretty good theory that Delta is likely to escape Omicron. And what may happen in the future is we might find that Delta and Omicron sort of swap over through time with cycles. So I saw some interesting models of this just yesterday or the day before, with them crossing each other through the years to come. So you shouldn't necessarily assume we've heard the last of Delta either. We don't have to put it out to pasture.
It's a thought, right? Let's finish on with a bit of macroeconomics. I mean, a month ago, you'd kind of stopped talking about this virus and get back to economics. So we've obviously got quite a bit of inflation now. Growth was 0.1% last month, and apparently that was largely due to GP appointments, which doesn't suggest a particularly healthy economy to me, or a healthy society. What's the outlook for next year, do you think?
Inflation.
Yeah.
Inflation is the outlook. So in the UK, we're talking, well, we have been talking 5, maybe 6, but that was sort of assuming that we were going to raise interest rates. And they didn't raise interest rates when they probably should have done a month or so back. And they seem to have been put off it by the whole Omicron thing, maybe likely to miss another set or two of rises associated with that. In the US, what's inflation? 6.4%, I think. It's the highest for many decades. And on data I saw, I think about 1/4 of US households expected inflation to be above 9% within 12 months. So that's likely then to lead to secondary effects of wage pressures. Once people start thinking that inflation is going to be that high and growing in the future, they're not going to just feel like, well, I can cope with it by my natural wages going up and promotions and things like that. They're going to think they need actual wage rises in order to just pay their debts, their mortgages, and
they've got a point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that may be a factor. We had this, what did they call it? The great relocation or something, with all this very large number of people who, as the COVID crisis seemed to be coming to an end a few weeks ago, were switching job in the UK. It was an unprecedented number of people suddenly switched job. And I wonder whether part of that has been, again, a feeling of that they wanted to get wage rises, and if somebody was going to offer them, they weren't even going to wait till Christmas or whatever to get their wage rises in the work they were, because they saw inflation coming and felt they needed it just in order to.
And why didn't the Bank of England see this coming? I think as recently as April or May, they were still saying it's going to be below 2% this year and next.
Well, I think there's quite a bit of uncertainty I've been critical.
Every indicator was pushing for inflation, wasn't it? Everything.
Well, I said there was going to be inflation, but I think it was tricky. That I feel like they wanted to be cautious in terms of how well things might go with the COVID situation, because if we went back into recession, then it could be that prices would fall down a bit. Also, I think there was a lot of uncertainty exactly what's going on with some of these inflationary things, as the balance between prices adjusting with new stuff that we buy, and because I buy a lot more things online now than I did in the past, and so if you go and you have some old obsolete basket of things that people used to buy when they went off and bought things physically in shops, it may not be the same set of things that people buy now that they were buying in the past.
Yeah.
And exactly what's going on with some of that stuff, I think, would be tricky for the Bank of England to take account of. You have some change in travel costs, for example. If people are traveling only 40 or 50% as much, because say to work, then those travel costs in due course will be a smaller part of people's budgets. But they'd be overweighted in the statistics. Yeah. So until you had a reasonable handle on what the basket of things people were buying in the future was going to be, it might have been tricky from the Bank of England's point of view to say exactly what all these inflation numbers meant. Look, at the end of the day, I'm playing it's a bit of a devil's advocate thing here, because I was critical of them and I think they made a mistake. I'm just trying to sort of defend my opponents rather than kick them while they're down. I think the reality is that they've taken their eye off the ball. I think that for quite a number of years, the Bank of England hasn't really much cared if inflation went quite a lot above target.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's another thing is,
they still don't, as far as I can see.
Yeah, I don't think they've cared for more than well over a decade. if inflation went. They didn't. It was that all that business of inflation was supposed to be between 1% and 3%. That was very much a early 90s to about 2007 kind of a thing. And I don't think we've really had an inflation target in the way that we might have understood it. After that, there was just some sort of expectations management to do with. That was all that there really was. The inflation targets turned into a nudge thing rather than actual constraint on policy making.
Yeah, an aspiration. Yes.
Yes.
Andrew, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining us. Very, very interesting. I'm sure everybody at home enjoyed that. So I wish you a Merry Christmas. I wish you at home a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you, I guess, early January time, or at least you'll see me. I obviously can't see you. Keep the comments flying. If you want to give us some money, please do. We have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/IEA London, or you can just go to iea.org.uk/donate. All contributions gratefully received. Thank you very much. Take care. Have a good one, and goodbye.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.